we have Dr. Jhalendra Rijal. He's an area IPM advisor with the University of California Cooperative Extension in Stanislaus County, Merced, and San Joaquin counties. So today he's going to be speaking on flat-headed borer concerns in California walnuts. So now I'm going to go ahead and pass this over to Jhalendra.
Okay, thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, Peter. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for being here today. Yeah, thanks so much. So I think Cheryl mentioned, introduced myself a little bit. So I work from Northern San Joaquin Valley, UC Cooperative Extension Office in Modesto. And this is a pest that becoming more and more concerning pest for the walnut growers, although it infests on other pests also. And so what I want to say is that it's an old insect that we know it exists in the environment, but it's becoming a problem in the valley, the flat-headed borer. And what I'm going to present today is mostly about learning about this insect, its biology, and different things that we're doing in order to understand better this pest, and also some few things after that point. So with that, I would like to start again, as I already a little bit outlined. So we'll talk about a little bit about background about flat-headed borer and why it's a concerning pest now. A little bit about ID and damage symptoms, because this seems to be a newer sort of problem. So a lot of us grower pest control advisors and a lot of people they are involved in management still may not know exactly what type of symptom you'll see with the flat-headed borer. I'll cover quite a bit about the biology of this insect. Again, it's a new problem, so we're exploring a lot of things about what kind of damage they do, what type of infestation you find in the orchard, what is their seasonal phenology. All that kind of feed into the IPM practices. Ultimately, we wanted to develop for this pest, talk about monitoring tools and some of the research effort that we're doing in order to refine the monitoring or find out how we can monitor this pest in the orchard. And of course, some management options and some of the recent research work that we're doing on this. Okay, so just a little bit of story behind this pest, right? So in fall of 2018, several growers from Northern San Joaquin Valley, you can see that area on the right on the map, especially in the San Joaquin and Stanislaus counties. Walnut grower, they reported some sort of damage that never seen before. And so we team up with the other advisor at that time, Joe Grant. You can see on the left side, Joe Grant. He was a farm advisor with pomology advisor with the University of California. Steve Seibold, he was USDA research entomologist working on these type of beetle pest in the past. And so a lot of us PCA growers, we gathered and start kind of visiting the orchard that had this new issue. And when we start inspecting them, we see the damage not only on the mature orchard, where you can, one of the symptoms is when you looked at the tree, you can see these dry, dead branches, just flagged branches. When you look a little deeper, then you can see these branches with a lot of feeding damage. When you remove the bark, you can see the larva, the borer, actually larva is right here on this. So you can see that. Maybe I can bring the laser pointer here. Okay, yeah, so the larva is right here feeding on it. There is a 5-6 years old tree, has a pretty extensive infestation, and here also the very young tree, it's about 2 years old tree, had infestation like that. So it's kind of the several orchard with the different scenario we see, but the common culprit was this flat-headed borer. So that's kind of trigger some of the things that we wanted to look at it about more deeper in this about this insect and what kind of other things that are more important, because it become a sort of serious issue at that point. So why is that, right? It's a 2018, we start seeing them, but why is that? So we're kind of like trying to figure out why this flat-headed borer issue becoming more problem. Of course, if you looked at the walnut, there could be multiple reasons, but these are some of the issues that the walnut growers are facing. Of course, the price is one of the top of the list. The very low price right now in the walnuts, it's basically hindering any kind of management of the orchard, including pest management. Another factor probably contributed to this is increased host abundance. So, the walnut acreage, if you looked at on this slide here from 1999 through 2018, you can see the steady increase of the acreage of walnuts in the valley. So right now we're above more than 360,000 acres in the valley. So of course there is a lot of host crop out there. Also, that whenever we're having these walnut in a newer areas, there are some of the area where the soil condition may not be optimal, but still there are orchard, especially new orchard located on those areas. So that also creates some sort of condition for the trees that gives a little bit more stress factor to the tree, and that might trigger some of these borer infestation. Of course, we see some of the climate change or drought related aspect of things also. So we think that this combination of the factors contributed to this sudden increase of the flat-headed borer infestation in walnut. So one example of the drought, as you see in here, this drought in over time from 2000 through 2019, in different periods, you can see the drought happening here. Deeper the color, that means the extreme drought condition, and certainly you can see anywhere from 2012 through all the way to 2019. That's the intense drought condition throughout the California, we all know. Probably we forget a little bit because of this year pretty good rain, but still were pretty severe conditions before that. So that might be contributed a lot to these emergence of the sort of these insect and gaining the status of the pest in the wilds. We also think that the continuous heat in the summer and late in the summer, it's causing all kinds of issues in walnuts. Walnut is susceptible to sunburn, as you see in some of these examples. Plus, also when there is an increased temperature, heat on these plants, on the branches as well as on the trunk, that becomes an attractive place for these flat-headed borer adult go and lay eggs. So that also probably trigger a little bit of the increase in infestation by this pest. Of course, yeah, again, the sunburn causes in the branches, and that becomes the sort of more favorable place for the flat-headed borer to lay for laying eggs. So there are multiple. Okay, so if we talk about a flat-headed borer, these are the beetle. The adults are the beetle pest, anywhere from 1.5 inch to 1 inch longer. Maybe it could be some species could be longer than that. There's a huge group of the insect under one family called Merced, and all of these beetle, their larvae has this characteristic flattened thorax, which we generally call the flat-headed, right? So because the head is very small here, so it's kind of whole entire thing looks like a kind of flat. So these all beetles, they have these immature stage, larval stage. It's called flat-headed borer. So there are multiple species of that. So these are the different species that reported or reported to be present in walnut orchard in California. So Chrysobothra malai. There's a different species here, third one, fourth one. So there are 4 different, at least, species of these flat-headed borer adults that are reported from walnut orchard. But based on our the research and investigation, I'll talk about a little later too, we found that the most common species that we're dealing with in walnut is the Chrysobothus malai, which is we call Pacific flat-headed borer. So that is the one species that we have much abundance, and we rear them from the infested branches, and we're sure confirmed at this point that this is the major species that we're dealing with in walnut orchard. Flatheaded borer is it's not an invasive pest. It's a native to California and western states. So it's always been present in the valley, and occasionally they infest on a lot of other fruit crops also, like for example, cherry, peaches, apricot, and other fruit crops. As an example, we've also seen some the infestation of flatheaded borer in blueberries, almonds, especially the young almonds, like first-year planting almonds. They are very exposed to the sunlight, and they don't have any other cover when there is a young plant in the orchard. So those becomes vulnerable to flatheaded borer attack. And in the past 3-4 years, I have got few calls about flatheaded borer infesting in almonds also. This is actually a picture of one of my one of the company consultant. He sent out this picture to me like a couple of days ago, looking at these flatheaded borer adults in almond orchard. I don't know much about the situation there, but he mentioned that there were a couple of trees dead, and because of that, we're seeing this flatheaded borer in the tree. The major problem of different species of the flatheaded borer, I'm not only talking of Pacific flatheaded borer, but also the wide range of flatheaded borer. It's causing problem in a lot of nursery trees, especially in the East Coast, like Georgia, Tennessee, Alabama, in North Carolina, South Carolina, that area. And so it becomes a pretty significant pest of the nursery trees, nursery crop in there, because they infest directly on that trunk. Of course, the walnut is the one that we're seeing recently, and I'll talk more about this. So moving on to the Pacific flatheaded borer, the one that emerged from the infested walnut branches, and we confirmed that this is the common species that we're dealing with. This slides a little bit. Okay, so yeah, so the flatheaded borer, if you think about, as I mentioned, they use the Pest beetles. You can see this kind of more or less shape of this. These adults, they deposit eggs on the bark, and larvae actually burrow through that bark, feeding on the cambium layer, and all the way to go to the sort of heartwood or the pith of that branches, and overwinter there. So these larvae, they go inside the branches and overwinter. So they pretty much spend, 6-8 months or so inside these branches during the winter time before they pupate in the inside, and then emerge as an adult. So if you looked at here, the egg larval stage, different stages of the larva, they pupate, pupal stage inside the bark next year, and then the adult will come out. So it essentially has a 1-year life cycle. So the adult come out, lay eggs, these larvae feed on, overwinter, and then again become pupa and become adults next year. So it has a 1 year, one generation per year. Female are known to lay eggs in about 100 eggs on the branches, and they essentially the larvae come out and feeding on it and go inside. So because of this, larvae actually basically feeding inside the bark and inside the wood, it's very difficult to manage or control this insect, because once they enter, it's just very difficult to apply any kind of pest management options, especially the insecticide. And then the adult activity we're seeing in the valley is from May through July. I'll talk a little more about that. So this is in the background. So flatheaded borer is becoming a newer problem. So there's a lot of things that we don't know about this insect. We knew in the past that these are more weaker trees, wounded, stressed trees, sunburned trees. They were much more vulnerable to these pests in the past. But now we're seeing more and more infestation to healthy looking, relatively younger trees and older trees and all kinds of the trees that we're seeing the damage caused by these pests. So something has changed, and some of the things that I already explained in the beginning, maybe those are the factors that are contributing to this. Since this became a pest, we did not have much information about its general biology, ecology of this insect, pest monitoring, and management options. So these are the entire thing that we're trying to explore on this pest so that it will help the grower to manage this pest effectively. Again, some of these research information are still preliminary, and we're still working on this. So I want to go into the little bit of biology side of things because it's important. Although some of the grower, they know about the flatheaded borer infestation, but the majority of the grower, PCA, or just did not know about actual symptom, feeding damage symptom. It's very difficult to see the larva when you look at the trees like this and find this tiny larva inside. And if you're not aware of the flatheaded borer, then it's very likely that you miss this. So because of that, we thought that it's important to first educate the growers by documenting different kinds of damage symptoms. So for example, this one here, you can see the branches with sort of like a wet condition type of symptom in here. So it's basically when they feed on the inside the bark, those juice basically come out and pretty much dampen that trunk. And not only trunk, but also the bigger branches also we're seeing the similar thing. So if we suspect something like this, that is at least the indicator that there might be flatheaded borer in it. So the generally called the brown sap. So again, example here, here, and here. So you can see sort of like a brown color sap oozing out from inside out. So that's one indicator of the flatheaded borer damage. The other one is visual damage of the wound. You can see and where you definitely see the insect frass came out from there. And so that's another obvious indicator of flatheaded borer infestation. When you cut and look at, peel out that branch, the bark of the branch, then you can see actually the larva inside. And again, the flat-headed is the good indicator, good ID characteristic that we know it's a flat-headed borer. And so if you're a little late, like in the late fall, November, December, when you start cutting those infested branches, then in that case, you might see the larva middle part of these branches in the peat. So these are some of these indicator of the damage symptom. Another factor is the feeding channel. So when you looked at the larva, when you kind of try to scrap all that bark, and you can see the feeding channel kind of extending and going into the longer side of that branches. Other cases from externally, you can see if you see a lot of flagged branches in walnuts, that's another way to suspect that there might be something going on here in terms of the flat-headed borer issue. So these are some of the. It seems pretty simple, but if you don't know about this, then you don't know, right? You are not aware of these kind of symptoms that are caused by the flat-headed borer. So that was the case in our case too. When we see these infested branches, we also see the D-shaped exit holes. These are the characteristic exit holes of the beetles when they pupate inside the branch and they come out from there by chewing these D-shaped holes, making these D-shaped holes. That's another indicator. If you start seeing these holes in these small dead portion of the branches, that's a good indicator that that's a flat-headed borer infestation. There are some extreme example of flatheaded borer infestation in some of the orchard. This is from Tulare County, 2022 that we visited this orchard. You can see that these walnut trees, mature walnut trees, it's basically cut down to up to this level because of the every year you see the infestation. There's just cutting and removing these wood, dead wood, and then just keep doing that until this point where you can see very small amount of the tree left in there. And so they decided to pull this orchard out completely because there's no worth, it's not worth keeping these orchard like that with this infestation. We've also seen those, I don't know whether you'll be able to clearly see them here, but when you looked at these branches, there is a lot of cut branches in here. And so the whole entire area, whole entire orchard has a lot of branches cut. If you looked at these, if you cut every year like that amount of the branches, then you certainly reducing your yield because those are the area when add up into your total amount that of the fruit that produced from that orchard. Some cases we've seen the bigger ones, so I just wanted to see share the relative size of these branches infested with the flatheaded borer. Sometimes we'll see even limbs they're infested, and some other cases we see this kind of dead dry infestation that is, of course, the old infestation because the one thing that flatheaded borer not do is go back and damage the dead ones, dead branches. They don't like that. So whenever they feed on green tissue, and that eventually that branch died. But when the beetle come out, they will infest the new green one. So that's definitely a problem because of that. On the young trees, you see the infestation in here. So you can see that, if you have the young trees with these kind of infestation, of course, this tree becomes weaker. They would not be able to recover. Many times that there is dead trees that we found in the orchard, especially the young orchard. So they are pretty vulnerable to flatheaded borer damage also. So since 2018 through 2022, these are some of the sort of like a presentation that we presented in different growth meeting and different extension meetings. And we asked the growers and pest control advisors what kind of damage symptom that you're seeing in your orchard after 3-4 years of this work. And so this is a result from there. So out of the 45 responses that we got from the participant, majority of the participants were pest control advisors, 57%, and 36% were grower. There was very few in the other category, but majority of them are grower and TCA. And 35% were responded that they have noticed at least the one of these kind of symptoms that I described earlier in the walnut orchard. So, and they think that it's associated with the flatheaded borer. So I think the one thing that I want to say is that whatever educational effort that we're doing, not just the extension presentation, but also the extension articles and other things, at least that they made growers, PCA aware of this problem, aware in a sense that where I to look for these infestation in the orchard, and how can find these and identify this symptom and that type of thing. Okay, so moving on to the little bit of the exploring biology side of things, we looked at various things. I wanted to look at what size of the branches they prefer in terms of their infestation. And also where they overwinter when we have these different sides of the branches they infest. So we looked at the two different orchards that we had flatheaded borer infestation, and we looked at their kind of the size of the wound, look at the feeding channel length, and etc. From those. So on an average, we found diameter anywhere from 13 to 40 millimeter. That's kind of the branch had the highest infestation overall. In both cases, that's translated to kind of more or less similar thing. We also looked at the length of the visible wound from outside. versus the length of the feeding channel, which can go inside the bark, and you may not notice that entire channel. So of course, 60-80 millimeter, which is about 3 to 4 inches of long in the branch. That's where we're seeing these feeding channel. That's also helps people to figure out what the flatheaded borer infestation in these branches. We also looked at where these larvae overwinter, whether they overwinter in the cambium layer or pith layer. So it depends on the size. If you have the smaller size, then they go directly into the pith middle part of the branches. But if there is infestation happens on the bolls or bigger branches, they will not be able to make it all the way to the pith. So in that case, we will see they're infesting on the cambium layer, or they're overwintering in cambium layer also. But as long as they have so we're seeing the same thing in the both orchard that we surveyed. Cambium layer as well as the pith, that's where they overwinter in the winter time. So about 60% they reach to the pith, or in the middle part of these smaller branches. We also looked at, there is quite a bit mortality of these larvae also when you looked at recovered these larvae. Basically what we did was we collected these infested branches, bring it to the lab, and did all these kind of things, including looking at whether these larvae are alive or dead, whether we recovered any type of parasitoid. And we found this one parasitoid, parasitic wasp, Trigonura californica, which is a Calcidae family of the parasitic wasp. And we found this extensively in many of these branches when we recovered these larvae as well as the beetles emerged from there. So when you looked at the larvae, they overwintering there, we see quite a bit, about 20% mortality there. So we don't know whether it's just because of the parasitic wasp or there might be some other fungal pathogen and things that's happening. We still need to investigate what is causing in this case. Okay, so now this is about where they infest and things. So in terms of the wide scale in the orchard, where you find majority of the infestation in the orchard, within the orchard, right? So insect can distribute either uniformly in a regular interval or randomly throughout the orchard, or majority of the cases they aggregate or clumped in certain portion of the orchard in general. And so we wanted to understand this because ultimately if we develop any kind of sampling plan, we need to understand what type of their distribution in the orchard so that we can focus in the area or not focus in certain area in order to make effective sampling plan for these insects. So that's the goal of this project here. So we basically, for this one, we selected the orchard that had flatheaded borer damage, at least a minimum 4 orchard that we did. We did this grid-based sampling. So basically in a exact kind of similar distances in a grid, which is we're following that like after 2 rows and after 2 trees type of pattern, and throughout that sampling area. So in total we observed 80 different trees in a equal interval in the portion of the orchard. We wanted to understand whether within that area the flatheaded borer is distributed equally throughout, or there is some aggregation or clump happening in certain portion of that area. So it's a pretty intense work, basically looking at and trying to find the wound in these orchard, basically visual survey of these orchard of these trees in these different orchards. Here, Cheng View and Sudan Gewali, who is a UC IPM advisor now. He was working for me before that, and so they are the one that going into the orchard and doing the visual sampling, including me. But I was the person taking pictures. So what we found out was, I don't want to go in detail into this, but I have this is a little bit of sophisticated process where you can use this software called the GS Plus, where you put all of these coordinate-based information as well as the damage history of that particular sample point, that how much damage you get, put into the system, into this software, and it will produce sort of like a map, as you see in here, the figure where that gives us the indicator that whether this aggregated distribution or randomly distributed. So based on this result, we found that majority of these cases, we found this aggregated distribution of the flatheaded borer in the orchard. So here is an example, kind of, this also produced a heat map. So where you can see there is a particular hotspot in particular part of the orchard. This is the same, but it's a 2-dimensional, 3-dimensional. This is one example. Another example is the same way. We have the certain portion of the area, we see more aggregation versus other, not so much. One of the things that we saw was that there was aggregating in a certain distance. So that helps us to develop the sampling plan later. But another thing also was that even though they're aggregating, but they're not aggregating mostly on the edges. So there is not much the orchard edge effect that you can see. We can see randomly they're aggregating, but inside that, inside the orchard, not necessarily on the borders. That brings up a point, is that means that they are not coming from somewhere else. It's more of the residential population that building within the orchard, and they're aggregating in different portion of that orchard, not necessarily on the orchard border. So that has implication in terms of when any kind of things we need to do, precision type of the spray, or any type of attract and kill in the future type, attract and kill type of the control measures in the future. These are the certain things that we need to understand first in order to implement any of that kind of tactics. So that part, so we know that a little bit about the feeding nature. We also know the distribution within the orchard. They're aggregating in certain areas, but not necessarily in the borders. We understand that. So now another important question that we have is, when they come out and when they adult or larval stage, they are present in the orchard. More or less we know about the larval stage, but when the adults are active in the orchard, what is their season of phenology? Because that would help to guide when to apply any kind of pest management tactics if we need. Without knowing that, we don't know when they emerge, when they lay eggs, and when we need to target these adults as well as the larvae. So that's the reason that we started exploring on the season of phenology of these pests. We looked at I call the semi-field study. Basically, we collected a lot of these infested branches, walnut branches from the field, bring it to the lab, put them in these big plastic bins, and put them outdoors so that the larva inside is still growing, and then you pupate, and then it turns into the adult. And this is a semi-field study, and we collected these adults at the end of the season. Also we did the field study where we basically cased the wounded portion of the branches and let the adult emerge from there. So we we check them every week in the summertime, so we know when these majority of the beetle come out from these kind of trial. Here is the one example of the beetle just came out and it's still inside that case. So we did that work and the support from the California Walnut Board in 2018, 2019. This is 2019. And what we found was, based on that emergence study looking at these branches here in these cases, we found in these bins, we found that majority of the adult emerge around the mid-June. So that's again in 2019. They start emerging in May all the way to July, but the majority of the emergence happened around that mid-June time. So that is really important and piece of information for doing anything further. Again, this is another year, 2021, in the two different orchards. We're seeing more or less similar thing in here too. So majority of them were kind of emerged. These adults were found from this emergence cage in around that time, in mid-June. This is again from this cage study, and which also coincide with what we saw in this beans study. So these are the in situ in orchard type of emergence study, and we kind of see the more or less same thing. So in adult emergence beginning as mid-May, so through all the way through July. So anywhere from May through July, that's the May, June, July, that's the time. Majority of them out of that, it will emerge in mid-June, which is the peak period of mid-June. And so based on this information, we kind of targeted the insecticide trial, focusing on those beetle emergence times so that we can target the larva when they lay eggs and then hatch out. So basically this guide us to do those. We're also still continuing doing some of these. These are some of the pupa that we recovered 2 days ago, well, yesterday. And there is a beetle also we recovered from the branch. So these are the beetles that's ready. These pupa will probably takes another 2 weeks or so and become adult and come out. Just giving a fresh example in here. We also collected these beetles that we recovered from these beans, infested branches, and then looked at identify all of them, and all of them came out as Pacific flat-headed borer, not other type of flat-headed borer. So that's another way that we're saying confidently that Pacific flat-headed borer is the one that causing the most damage. So now we understand the beetles phenology based on these cage study, but as a grower, as a PCA, you need some kind of tool where you can detect these insects by using traps efficiently and effectively, right? So understanding is one thing, but also at the same time monitoring, continuous monitoring, we need the better, effective, efficient tool. So we wanted to explore more monitoring tools. And this is one of the pictures here. You can see we use the multi-funnel trap to see whether these beetles will be attracted to these traps. There are some evidence of the Merced beetle, not the Pacific flat-headed borer, but other different kinds. Merced attracted to the purple color, and including emerald ash borer, which is an invasive pest, and it's moving westward. It's established in the east and middle part of the country, and then now is moving in the western states. So they also use for emerald ash borer, they also use the purple trap, which is the color attractant for these beetles. So we started from that point. We looked at the purple, we looked at the green trap also. So these are the color attractant we put into the orchard. These are the big traps with the gluey stuff on the outside of the trap. So whenever they attracted, they will stuck in there, and we can count them. We also use the purple funnel trap, and that's in 2019. We caught some flat-headed borer beetles in this, in these both kinds of trap, but wasn't that efficient and effective. And if you think about this trap, it's pretty big with the sticky thing on the outside, sticky glue on the outside. It's just not that convenient when you talking about the monitoring of this insect. So we started exploring a little more different things as a part of the team with the USDA NEFI grant, where California is part of it, but we have a lot of other state, Oregon and the East Coast state, they are also participating and looking at some of the attractant for flat-headed borer. So we started looking at ethanol. Ethanol is produced by the plants when they are stressed, and also the benzaldehyde. These are the two different components that attractant that we tried in 2021. You put the effort in throughout the year and then end up not catching anything, right? So that's sometimes life of the researcher. So we did not get much successful in there. I mean, we caught some. There are total 7 beetles that we caught, and wasn't that very effective. 2022, we started looking at a few other things that we also looked at: the double, the ethanol lure dose, basically ethanol loading double, and then also use the hexanol in these purple and green traps. We recovered some number of the adults between 15th of June and 28th of June, about 75% of the total. So we have hope on these attractant a little more, hexanol acetate and hexanol. And so we're trying to continuing kind of using this in addition to some other trap this year. So this is a purple kind of long trap. It's mimicking the trunk and has a sticky surface throughout, again, outside. And also we're using these traps with the lure on the side here, the hexanol as well as the hexanol acetate, and then also the combo. So we put them out this year. Everything is kind of delayed by, late by three to 4 weeks in terms of insect activity in the orchard. So we have not caught anything yet, but we're hoping that we'll start catching some, at least on these traps. So again, whole thing is still work in progress. Even though we were working on last 3-4 years, still we have not found that magic one that we can use and multiply and use it in the orchard effectively. So we're working on it. We're still continue working on it. So hopefully one day we'll have this monitoring tool available. Okay, so management options. So that's another thing that's great that we know about these, and we also trying to figure out how we also know that when they come out, we know that monitoring tools who are working on it, but what are the management options for the orchard that are hammered by these pests, and especially younger orchard, especially orchard that has a pretty extensive damage? They need some sort of relief to look at some of the management options. So we started kind of looking at that option also. Just a general management practices for flat-headed borer based on what we know. It's basically try to avoid the younger trees, try to avoid or actually prevent the severe sunburn by using this paint, the 50% white latex paint mixed with the water, and basically apply them in these trunks, and as you see in here. And then basically look at it. So you don't see the upper part of this here because they were infested by the flat-headed borer basically, and they caught that whole portion and rebarred them here. So it's kind of pretty damaged, pretty destructive in some cases. But in any case, so coming back to these paint, 50% is still the best way to go to prevent the sunburn and thereby preventing or at least reducing, minimizing the flat-headed borer infestation in there. For the older trees, when there is infestation, a lot of these branches, they cut those branches out and prune those branches during the winter time, because as I mentioned, that winter time, this larva are still inside that infested branch. So whatever you will be able to remove from there, you'll also be removing those larvae inside also. And chip them, burn them. Well, burn may not be possible, but at least you can chip them once you collect these pruning branches. Also, try to keep the orchard going with the optimal irrigation, optimal fertilizer and other things, so that the tree grow naturally without much stress in it, because the stressed trees are more attractive to the flat-headed borer. Also, there has been also the work done in the nursery crop in the East Coast, where they looked at the cover crop or any kind of vegetation on the trunk of these young nursery plants. They pretty much avoided those trees with where it has a lot of grasses and cover crops. So that could be one of the things that can be tried. So we have not done that work in walnuts, but that could be something that we can try. So this is an example here. What they did in the East Coast, what they did in the nursery trees is that keep these grasses growing in the couple of rows, and then other rows they herbicide it so that they will be basically barren. There will be no cover crop on those. And when looked at their presence, number of the flathead were attack on those, and this is 2010, this is 2013 data. And herbicided one is the one that is the open circle, the open bar here, and then the black dark bar here is with the weedy, so with the cover crop. So you can see the number of the attack were significantly very low on the weedy portion of this planting compared to the barren. So in other words, when you have these walnut orchard, it's maybe beneficial to keep a little bit of vegetation going in that orchard. There might be the competition for other things, but I think at least in terms of flatheaded borer point of view, that might be a good practice. We still need to do work on the walnuts, specifically looking at these aspects. But this is one of the promising thing that we might be able to do it, especially on the young, first 1 or 2 year, 3 years old planting of walnuts. For the mature tree, that doesn't apply because they infest on anywhere branches and things, so that doesn't apply. But for the younger trees, that could be something that helps to reduce the pressure on flathead borer. And so this is the different species of flatheaded borer. It's very close, very similar type of nature of damage. They do Caesorbotus femorata, which is more common in East Coast, and Malai is the common in the West Coast. So this is based on that. We also looked at some of the insecticide option in our system, because the idea is that since now we know that beetles are emerging and then flying in the mid-June around that time, so it's about 2 weeks or so they will be able to really lay eggs, and then the new larvae will come out. So the idea is that if we use any insecticide that is maybe in combination with some of the insecticides and some of the pests that we already target, like curdling moth or walnut huskfly, and target that time, piggyback, and use these insecticide to help to reduce that neonate. Basically, try to help to kill that freshly hatched larva when they're still in the process of going into the wood. So that's what we tried with the commonly used insecticide in 2022. We're continuing doing this trial in 2023, also in summer. This is relatively young orchard, fifth leaf orchard with the natural flatheaded borer infestation in it. And we use these multiple replicates, multiple trees. We applied with these different insecticide and evaluated in the late fall and early winter of 2023, basically rating of the number of the wounds that we're finding on these trees that are treated with a different insecticide. So here, if you looked at the different insecticide, Exerol, that's a cyantrinyl pearl, one of the diamide insecticide. Altacor, it's also another diamide insecticide. They perform pretty good compared to untreated control. Cell, that also has a pretty good efficacy. Intrepid Age also has a little bit of activity in there. Some of these products didn't work that well. But again, even though with these products, I mean, it's also pretty difficult to just control the flathead borer just using the insecticide. So we need to come up with some other culture practice, biological control, and combine that with the insecticide in order to make the effective treatment. So we'll continue this work next year also. So it's just kind of like summary. So, I mean, I covered a lot of things here, but again, I wanted to give you a little bit more exposure of these different things, what's going on, and try to figure out when we, start thinking about managing or understanding this pest and effectively managing it using following the IPM principle. So flathead borer, it really is a re-emerged pest. It's not a new pest. It's not invasive, but it's becoming a more serious pest, as we call re-emerging pest. We documented different kinds of symptoms and damage that helps a grower to figure out what is happening in their orchard. We know that now adult are flying in May through July, with the peak period being mid-June. That help us to formulate any kind of management tactics. They aggregated in certain portion of the orchard, but not necessarily in the orchard age. And we're still trying to figure out the monitoring, effective attractant for monitoring of this pest, and we're continuing doing that. We have some of the insecticide that we found out can help, but we'll still continue doing this work, and also might need to think about some of the cultural practices work, biological control work. And also plus, honestly, also will be involved a lot of extension activity and things in coming years. We are already doing it a lot more. When before I started this, I Googled it, say the flatheaded borer in walnuts, and then when I looked at all the articles the article that I produced, so it's a good thing that we're creating a lot of outreach materials, extension material for the growers in different mediums, including podcast and other things. And we'll continue doing that, because that's very important aspect. One thing is having infestation, other thing is extending that information to the end user, and we're in that business, so we'll continue doing that extension type of method also. So with that, I would like to thank all the people helping this project, and also the funding agencies, because California Walnut Board and USD NIFA, I have these long-term SCRI grants that help me to do these various things related to this pest in terms of research. So we'd like to acknowledge that.
But thank you so much for your presentation today. Really appreciate you staying on too and answering some questions.
Of course, yeah. Well, thank you, Cheryl. Thank you, Peter. And yeah, we'll see you whenever next time.
All right. And thank you everybody for hanging on. And we hope to see you back when we resume late summer, early fall.
Okay, great.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.